because when us weirdos and us strange folk, we just fly our flags, it can
Yeah.
make other people uncomfortable because they're jealous. They haven't met themselves that far yet, and they don't know if they ever will. And
I'm always talking about living your dharma, living your passion, living your purpose, following your intuition, and how sometimes that really doesn't go with conventional wisdom of how we're supposed to show up in life. Now, a lot of us who are healers on this planet, or we facilitate leading people home to themselves, healing, whatever you choose to call it, we've gone through a lot of deep experiences in our life. And the reason we've had those deep experiences is because they give us the context and the knowing so that we can move people forward. Years ago, before I began apprenticing with my shaman, I had the opportunity to have dinner with him. And one of the things that he said at dinner was that we cannot assist healing in others that which we have not healed within ourselves. That's where the context and the depth of the understanding, the knowing, and being able to meet people on that frequency comes from. Today, I have a special guest. With me today is Anne Marie. Anne Marie is a death doula, and she's the host of Dear Psychopomp, Let's Talk About Death. It's a podcast that dives headfirst into the conversation that most people avoid. She's based in beautiful British Columbia with a lively household of 9 animals. Anne Marie helps people unlearn their fear of death, one honest, heartfelt, and occasionally hilarious conversation at a time. In a past episode, I talked about how I no longer fear death. I'll link that episode below. But fear of death is something that has been conditioned inside of us because we never truly die. Grab something to drink, find a comfortable place to sit, or if you're out on your walk, just have a heartfelt listen. You're going to really enjoy this episode. Well, Anne Marie, welcome and thank you for being here. I've introduced you a little bit already. If there's something you would like to add, but I really think that the questions are going to come in around this concept of helping people to not fear death.
well, thank you so much for having me. I would say it sounds very scary and it sounds very stressful, and sometimes it can be. Not that often, but I have found that the closer you are with death, the more death conscious you are, the more you live. It helps you hold that perspective of life is precious. It's a song, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if we can accept that and remove the fear from it, we can live more fiercely and freely and without that kind of impending doom following us around like a little rain cloud all the time. And for me personally, I've been around death since I was 4 years old. And I find that people who have met death earlier on have a healthier relationship with it because children can easily absorb, people die and that's okay. And so a lot of people who haven't dealt with death personally, it hits them harder because they haven't had a chance to start processing through those things. And I think that's where the fear comes from. And and it's also we all have our death myths, typically based on what our first experience with death is. And usually it's traumatic, it's unknown, unexpected, and so that just instills that fear. And so my mission, my calling is to help as many people as possible remove that fear.
Yeah, you mentioned something that when you said it, it brought up for me a very different experience growing up. And you talked about children and death, that they can process it and understand it a little more easily. I grew up in an area where children were protected, at least when I was a child, maybe not now. Children were protected from that. Can you share a little bit more about your perspective on that, about how it's easier to move through that experience?
Of course. So when I first met death, it was with an animal. And so that's how I had it explained to me. We our time here is borrowed and we have to give it back. And I think that introducing it at a younger age when our brains are a bit more pliable is, of course, age appropriately in language that they understand. And it's actually easier for myself as a death doula to speak to children than it is to adults.
Oh, I'm sure. Because they
Yeah,
don't have all these preconceived notions and beliefs. I just something just popped into my mind, and it's going to be a little funny. It's not about actual death, but to just demonstrate how things get conveyed differently, based on the family or regional. Back in 1997, we came home when my son was only 5, 6 months old to have his christening. And my two stepchildren, they're my sons. I call them my older sons, but just for context, sons from another mother. It was their first time coming to Mississippi from Connecticut. And when we came down, we were at the small church. We have the christening ceremony and we're taking pictures. And then partway through, I realized my husband and the older boys aren't there in the picture, because I mean, it was just family, it was crowded, everybody gathered around. And my oldest son, who was in kindergarten at the time, asked my grandmother, why are they sprinkling water on Mikey's head? And she said, because we're giving Mikey to God, meaning committing him to God, not he's going to go away. But Andy interpreted that as like a sacrifice, like Michael's gonna die.
oh,
So he was crying and upset, and Ron had went just like, what's the matter? And he was upset because he thought Mikey was gonna die. And I just think it's, we all kind of look back on it now, and we can laugh about it as adults. But for him, that was a very emotional and heart wrenching moment. And fortunately, my husband had the wisdom to go sit and talk to him and to explain to him what was happening and not brush it off as an, oh, he's going to be fine or whatever, and create some unresolved perception of what was happening. Do you find that from family to family, you see big differences in these discussions around death? I'm just curious of what you've seen.
every single family is different. I have clients who are terminal, they're imminent, they're accepting it, and they are the ones comforting their loved ones. I have clients who refuse to say the word death. I have clients who, they're having an existential crisis because they've never had a big loss in their life before. And so they have that anticipatory grief. And that's why one of the main things I do is talk therapy, because knowledge removes fear. The more you know about something, the less fear you have. And so the hardest part of my job is getting people to open up about it because there is such a deep rooted fear and anxiety around it. And then I come walking in, I'm like, hey, so how do you feel about death? And we just, it shocks them for a bit. And you start off with open-ended questions. But there's, the other side of the coin is the religious and spiritual people that I help. They kind of have that foundational belief work already. And so they know it's going to happen, but they're nervous or they need some reassurance. Did I believe in the right things? Did I do the right things? Am I a good person? And so it all depends on the person's value structure that they've created within themselves as to how far I can meet them and how far they've met themselves. And so a
Yeah.
lot of end of life discussions is it's self-discovery.
I had mentioned to you beforehand that when I was younger, there had been a brief period of time where there were a lot of funerals in my family, and how at one point I was so tired of funerals. I had just gotten my driver's license and I snuck out of the funeral home when we were supposed to be doing visitation. I got in really big trouble. I didn't understand then that I would get so emotional and so heavy because I'm empathic. I'm picking up other people's emotions. But as you're
Mhm.
talking, I realize just how much death I've faced in the 10 years that I did critical care, because 8 of those 10 years were in an open heart ICU. And we would have to have these conversations with family and prepare family and to see how families, the dynamics that would happen. At least I, in that situation, had the peace of knowing that I was in control of doing everything I could to make sure an individual didn't suffer. And I could reassure the families that we were doing everything to make sure that they weren't suffering. There's something interesting that happens in that whole process. In that, and you can elaborate on this if you like, if you have experiences around where loved ones and others that they may not know come to be with them as they transition and bridge over. And so they will have these conversations. I mean, that was one of the things as an ICU nurse. If you had someone who had been sick and they were doing better, it's like, oh, they've turned the corner, they're having a really good day. And then all of a sudden they start talking about their brother Joey, and you call the family like, oh, they're talking about their brother Joey. Is that someone that wants to come visit them? Oh no, he passed away 10 years ago. I can go get the crash cart and put it outside the door if they
Mhm.
weren't a do not resuscitate, because I'm like, oh boy, there's a thinning of the veil. I wouldn't have known those words then, but there's a thinning of the veil there to help them carry over. And I've seen far too many people wait until they'll be stopping all of the high-tech support and just decide comfort measures. And the family would wait because the doctors would say, oh, it might not be very long now. And the family would be tired. They're like, we're going to go out and get dinner. We'll be back in an hour. And they won't even make it outside the front doors of the hospital as soon as the individual knew that they were stepping away. They would transition. I'm getting God bumps from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet
Mhm.
having this conversation. How do you approach that with your clients, or your clients' family? Is that something you see all the time, or is it just sometimes?
Nope, that's perfectly normal. It's called The Great Show.
I love
So
that. The Great Show.
The Great Show. And typically, and you always hear about it because they're like, Mom's doing great. I'm gonna go home and have a shower. And they just get that reassurance, like, okay, like, we still have today. And it really depends on the person who is passing away, because some people don't want to be alone when they die.
Right.
Some people would rather have that chance to say goodbye to themselves, and they don't want their loved ones to witness it. As powerful and spiritual and electrical and everything as that moment is, like you can feel the energy in the room when someone passes away. But not everyone wants to be witnessed that way. And so I always tell my clients I have some paperwork that I give them that has the withdrawal of the elements theory. It has all the signs from 3 months before death up until the moments of death, what to expect, what they're going to see, what they're going to smell, what they're going to hear, what's normal, what's not, when to ask for, extra comfort measures, things like that. But the great show is just that one final hurrah as your body gets ready to pass on. And it can be really beautiful with some Alzheimer's patients. Sometimes the great show, they'll be lucid and they'll get a chance to say their goodbyes. And some people just get a chance to read their favorite book. It's it's really beautiful. It's bittersweet. You okay?
You're making me cry.
I'm sorry. I have that effect.
I knew that my father was going to pass days before he passed. And the afternoon, wow, there was an afternoon the day before he passed where he was full on lucid. And he literally, we live in a very rural area. We live in a very rural area. So he has a four-wheeler. Some people call them ATVs. And he literally went around the neighborhood, like 2 square miles, and went and visited everyone.
Oh,
And then the next day I called to check on him, and he had no idea who I was. And the sitter kept trying to say, Sammy, it's Penny, it's Penny. I said, no, 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 no. If he does not know who I am, do not make him think he should know who I am.
mm,
Just let him be. And 30 minutes later, she called me. He was having a massive heart attack. And it just made me think of that. And then at the funeral, the sitter who had been with him that day told me in more detail some things that had happened earlier that week. And his wife had actually come to him, and she said, Penny, I have to tell you this. I couldn't tell you the other day. I didn't want you to worry and leave your job to come. She said, but he's having this conversation. I'm like, Mr. Sammy, who are you talking to? And he's like, this lady over here. And she goes, who? He goes, can't you see her? We're pulling threads. And as he continues to talk, he says to what appears to a person as nothingness, I told you I'll be there when I get ready. And she hadn't told me that. But 2 days later, I woke up at 2 a.m. with the message, call your father, tell him everything you ever wanted to tell him.
mhm,
So that next day at lunch, I called him and I gave him permission because I knew he was seeing her, but I didn't know about that conversation specifically. And I gave him permission. I said, I'll be fine. I will take care of everything. It's okay. And it's the one time in my life that my dad cried that I knew of. And that afternoon was when he got on the four-wheeler. He took a nap and then he went and he saw everybody from Timbuktu to here. And it's a beautiful moment. And it's something I am so grateful for because not everybody gets that gift.
mhm,
And I think my soul know that I needed that to be able to move forward. You had mentioned before actually recording that you've also been through the loss of parents from estrangement.
Yes.
When you work with clients who've experienced something like that, how do you help them face that or address that? Does it come up often?
More often than you would think, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's, intergenerational trauma is rampant, and we are starting to give give it vocabulary, give it names, and talking about it more instead of, oh, that's just how she is. We just have to put up with it, or that's just what he's like. You, we're holding ourselves accountable more and more for boundaries and the people we love. And so the first thing I do with clients who have dealt with estrangement is working on that complex grief, because it's not an easy decision, especially with immediate family, to say, okay, to protect myself, I have to remove you from my life. There is a grief that comes with that. There's a grief that comes with maintaining those boundaries. There's the loss of what could have been, what should have been, what would have been. You have all that self-doubt. Did I make the right decision? Is this going to help facilitate any change? And so it's really helping them come to peace with, it's okay to protect your heart if it's from the people that you love. And you are in charge of teaching people how to treat you. And when it's a parent and you are failed so horribly and treated so terribly, the typical reaction that I get is, well, that's your mother. That's your father. Their family. Just put up with it. Be the bigger person. I'm like, I don't need to be the bigger person. Why do I have to be the bigger person? I was the child.
Yeah. In my work, I find myself telling people when they go on this journey of change, I'm like, you get to decide what the boundaries are. Can you see them and have light conversation? And then just, if they go somewhere you don't want to go, say, you know what, I have to leave now and step away. Or is it every conversation there's something happening to the effect that it's not worth your personal peace and your mental health to be present? Because it's just such a common thing. You were saying that, well, it's your mom. Being somebody's birthing person doesn't mean that they have to have a relationship with you. If you mentally and emotionally harmed them and can't see the wrong in what you did, or just don't see the need to change, like, we don't have to submit ourselves to repetitive mental and emotional abuse.
No, you have to you have to protect your peace,
Yes.
and it's very difficult. And for anyone listening who's under the legal age, if this is happening to you, there are resources. There is help. You can talk to school counselors, you can talk to a trusted adult. You don't have to be silent about it. And I think that's the part that really got to me as a child, because I had no idea who to ask for help, if I could ask for help. I didn't know if it was normal. I thought it was me. I was doing something wrong. And of course, as a child, you're seeking that acceptance and validation from your parents. And when you don't get it, you're like, okay, like maybe I'm just a bad kid. Maybe I need to step it up a notch. And, when I was growing up, there was no one around. Some of my family knew what was going on, but they didn't know how to talk about it. And they didn't know how to talk to me about it. And they didn't know how to talk to my parents about it. And so they would help out in their own ways with acts of service or words of affirmation. And, those little trickles of humanness got me through. And of course journaling. But when you have to unpack 30, 40, 50 years of intergenerational trauma, it's not overnight. And so having that confidence in yourself and that belief in yourself that you're not broken, you're not wrecked for the rest of your life. This isn't a cloud that has to follow you around 24/7. You can heal from this. And when people, kind of like you said, when you give them permission, you are allowed to protect your peace. You have a right to protect your peace as long as you're not hurting yourself or anyone else. Then you should. You get one shot in this body. What do you want it to look like?
I was listening to something yesterday morning and it was put so succinctly that I just loved it. People will not regret the things they did, they'll regret the things that they didn't do.
Hmm.
And I remember reading the results of a survey that was done in hospice here in the US by a registered nurse. And the number one regret in the results that they collected was that they didn't do the things that were important to them. And not from a selfish point of view, but denying themselves to experience happiness and fulfillment.
Hmm.
How do you help clients bridge that, come to acceptance?
So what I do with my clients, it's called a life review. Very important. I think everybody should do it multiple times throughout their lives. It's just keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on. And part of that regret usually comes from fear. You were scared to say the thing or do the thing or stand up for yourself. And a lot of people mention, I worked too much. There's no award for being good at business. You're not going to
Yeah,
be on your deathbed and be like, wow, I worked really hard and made a lot of money and I was never home. If you're too busy worrying about your existence and planning for your existence, you're going to miss existing. You got to stop and smell the roses. It's all about balance. I'm not saying don't plan for your future, but plan
yeah,
plan for now too. Like have fun while you're at it. And for clients who have those regrets, we work on self-compassion and forgiveness.
yeah,
They need to forgive themselves for being scared. It's okay to be scared. It's okay that you didn't say those things.
yeah,
And I will help them with legacy projects. And, you know, 8 times out of 10, that is letters to their loved ones, saying the things that they always wanted to say. And sometimes there's burn letters because they needed to say these things, but the other person probably didn't need to hear them or wouldn't respond um,
yeah.
properly.
it really lightens our heart to be able to let go of these things that we're carrying. In terms of being a death doula, was there a moment when you knew that this is your gift, this is what you're good at?
There were many moments before and during being a death doula. I've I've always had this sort of intuitive, I just knew what to do. I knew how to comfort people. I knew what to say, and I've always had that sort of role in my life. So in some ways I was a death doula before I became a death doula, and I was a cemetery director before, and it really cemented like this is where I belong. This is this is what I'm called to. And so I tried a whole bunch of different jobs. I was peace officer, bylaw officer. I was going to try and be a police officer. And I was always so close to feeling like, okay, this is what I should be doing. And then after taking the course and doing everything and having people reach out to me, and I'm not I'm not confused. I'm not taken aback. I know the answers. I know how to find the answers. I know how to find the resources. And my husband calls it my face, because when we go out in public, people will just tell me their life story. We'll be buying dog food, and the cashier will just, forgive the term, trauma dump, because she just feels safe enough and heard. Because when I go out, I I don't go out in public a heck of a lot, because I find that this happens quite often, and I don't have I'm not good at small talk or disingenuine, how's the weather? And so when I ask people at the cashier, they're like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, great, how are you? How's your day going? It just lights them right up, just by genuinely asking, how are you doing today? Like, how's your day treating you? And so I guess with this superpower of being a good listener, it's brought me to where I am. It's like everything in my life that happened or didn't happen brought me to this moment, and everything kind of clicked and it makes sense, and I'm passionate about it and I'm excited about it, except for the bookkeeping part. I don't like that part. Not my strength, but it's long story short, it's kind of just always been there, and it kind of found me.
Now, there was a time when you were working a traditional job full time, and we chatted about this a little bit last week, how when we're comfortable being with ourselves, we don't have to be chatty and in conversation. And I totally get what you're saying. I don't like superficial chatter. I always thought it just made me uncomfortable, but I have a deeper perspective on it now, which we'll leave for another conversation maybe.
Hmm.
But you know, you were sharing that it kind of became unbearable, my words, not yours, to be in that job. I mean, the universe will give us nudges, God, divine consciousness, divine intelligence, whatever you want to call it. It will give us nudges to get us to engage in what it is that we're here to do. When you were in that environment, did you immediately know that, geez, I have to get out here and I have to get more involved in the business or start the business? Or did you just think it was the people you were around? How did you come to the conclusion that it's time for me to move away from what society tells me I should be doing?
It wasn't immediate. It was a lesson that I needed to learn. So I was there for just over 3 years. And, I understand the concept of small talk, the niceties of it, the politeness of it, the routine. Hello, fellow human being, I acknowledge you. Here's a rhetorical question that I don't need you to answer. But sitting with my coworkers and them being uncomfortable with silence was difficult because I'm fine with silence. I love sharing the same space and just doing our own things. And my father was military, and so he instilled in me a bunch of ethics and morals and integrity. And so for me, that 9 to 5, it wasn't my passion, but I'm going to do my best. I'm not there to make friends. I'm there to do my job as to the best of my ability, and then go home to real life. And so for about the first year, I was trying to gain their acceptance, to be one of the team, part of the family. And it just wasn't working. And to the point where I was waking up in the morning to get ready for work, dreading going in. And I loved the job. It was definitely a passion, but the atmosphere was catty and clicky, and that's just not my shtick.
Yeah, they weren't very conscious.
No. And it took me a long time. Again, another lesson that took a while to learn. People will only meet you as far as they've met themselves. And it's not your responsibility to hold up the mirror for them.
I love that.
And so I had to leave. It was affecting my chronic illness. I have Crohn's disease, and my spirit and my mind, and it was draining me every day, every second that I was there. And so I was so deep into it that I didn't even realize that I could leave,
Oh, wow.
because I had made, at the time, it was my dream job. And so I had made this little contract with myself, like, all right, this is fantastic job, fantastic pay, took me away from home a lot, but worth the cost of admission. And then I sat down with my husband and I was like, honey, I'm tired. I don't want to go to work anymore. I can't do this. And I was having so many flare-ups, and I ended up having an emergency surgery. And since I've left, I'm in remission now, even though being an entrepreneur, a small business owner, I have two small businesses and a podcast and a casual part-time job. which sounds like much more than just one full-time job. But I'm happy. I'm fulfilled.
Yeah.
I get
It
up every day and I'm like, yeah, let's do this.
it really is true what they say, when you do what you love, you don't work a day in your life.
Mhm.
Because when I have a day where I'm in creative mode or working with clients, that's not work. That's me being me. Now,
Mhm.
the admin side of it, I agree. You vibrated your way right out of that environment. You were vibrating on such a different frequency. Now, is that when you started the podcast?
No, I actually started the podcast 1 month ago today. It's brand new.
It's brand new. So there's a story behind the name Dear Psychopomp.
Yes.
Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. So a psychopomp is it's a Greek term for someone who guides the souls of the living. And it's not self-proclaimed. It's a nickname that a dear friend of mine gave me before he passed away. And he has the most incredible and tragic story that just touched my heart and touched my soul. And he became my long lost younger brother. And just before he died, he sent me this text: I love you, my dear psychopomp. And it just, it keeps him alive for me. It keeps his legacy alive. I still get to talk about him regularly. And it's just my legacy, something for me to leave behind. My voice is out in the airwaves, telling his story, telling my story, helping other people tell their stories. And it just brings such a sense of peace and fulfillment to be able to do that. And like you said, when you're just being yourself and it's accepted, I don't even know the word for that feeling. My heart just blooms because I'm not pretending. I'm not doing my customer service voice. How can I help you? Uh, I'm just being me. And the world is like, hey, cool. And
Yeah.
that just, the inner peace, I thought I had inner peace before. Mm-mm. I mean, you have to work on inner peace. It's kind of like hygiene. You need
Yeah.
to work on it every day, but it just took it to a whole different level, being my authentic self and not having that worry about, well, what if they don't like me? Well, if they don't like me, they can hit pause and go find something else to listen to. That's fine.
Yeah.
The people who are meant to be in my circle will stay, which is another hard lesson to learn. I find the podcast being, I think it's the best tool for what I do. And because, yes, people are scared of death and dying and grief and loss, and it's hard. And you can buy the books and go to the groups and all that stuff, which is awesome. But for all the introverted people, or the people that are still too scared, or scared to speak up about it, they can listen to a podcast without having to announce it to the world. They can get all the knowledge they need, and it's just a perfect tool. They can listen to it over and over again if they want. And that's why I love having these conversations, because if it's just one person who listens to this and goes away with like, all right, like I feel good, let's do this. then my work is done.
Absolutely. And I think that there are probably more people out there who feel intuitive in the same way that you do. And they probably feel alone. They
Mhm.
probably worry that people will think they're a little strange or whatever the case may be. And
Mhm.
I think it's a great way for people to say, you know what, this is actually a thing. This serves a purpose. It's not a cross to bear, it's a gift.
No, you might make other people uncomfortable, and that's okay, as long as you're not hurting them. Not everyone's gonna like you, and that's okay. You don't like everyone, that's still okay. Um, and you're not strange or weird. They're scared of how well you know yourself. Because when us weirdos and us strange folk, we just fly our flags, it can
Yeah.
make other people uncomfortable because they're jealous. They haven't met themselves that far yet, and they don't know if they ever will. And so
Yeah.
instead of being angry at not being accepted by these people or by them calling me weird or strange or, you know, I talk about death all the time. Of course it's weird, and that's okay. But I feel for them.
Yeah.
Imagine being so scared to be your authentic self that you lash out at people who are doing it. That's not in alignment.
Yeah. That's 100% ego.
Yeah. And
Uh,
the funny thing is, the ego doesn't even exist.
yeah. And I mean,
You
that
made
could
it up.
even, yeah, and it could even be that generational stuff. They're finding that we encode responses from generational trauma into our DNA. And
Absolutely.
we end up carrying things and we don't understand why we carry the fear.
Mhm.
And you said you have a couple of different businesses. You shared one of those with me last week. You make, is it memorial jewelry? What is it that you do there with the jewelry?
So after my father passed away in 2018, I didn't really have anything of his, and I'm very not materialistic, but amulets or necklaces or I'm visual. I want things to see and hold, to remember. And I didn't have that, and something in my brain was just like, you know what? You don't have it, and a whole bunch of other people don't have it. So why don't you do it for them to help you heal from not being able to? So in a teeny little basement, I started Here Keepsakes, and I do keepsakes and jewelry and customized mallets and prayer beads. And so I put ashes, feathers, fur, dirt, sand, and it doesn't have to be just memorial. It doesn't have to be ashes. It can be sand from a vacation. It can be just any memory that you want to keep alive and close to you. And it's been so healing being able to do that for people.
Yeah. Well, if do you have a website for that, or how do people contact you for that? Is that something we can put in the show notes for you?
For that, yeah, we can put it in the show notes. I only have a Facebook for it right now. It's on Facebook as Here Keepsakes, Hiraeth. And there's a whole bunch of photos. I can also create molds. I had someone make a clay impression of their cat's paw print, and then I made keepsakes from that. And it was just so awesome uh, to be a part of that journey. And I always ask when working with cremated remains as my way of honoring the departed, what their favorite music was, or a favorite song or artist or genre. And so I'll listen to that while I'm mixing and pouring and everything like
Frequency.
that. Just to give my acknowledgement to the person and or the animal, like, hey, like I acknowledge you. Thanks for letting me work with you and helping your family heal.
I love that. I encourage everyone to go follow her Facebook page, subscribe to the podcast. We will link that below. We will link your Facebook page. I know you're on LinkedIn, but you said you're not over there that often, but we will add that as well. Is there anything else that you would want to share to close us out here?
Don't forget to do nothing. Schedule in your nothing. The dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing.
I love
Just don't forget to enjoy the ride while you're on it.
totally, totally love that.
Hmm.
Everyone, please do your thing. Leave a review, share this episode, and thank you for being here, Anne Marie. I really appreciate this conversation, and you will go down in history as the first person who's made me cry on my podcast.
Thank you, and I'm sorry.
No, no apologies. No apologies. They were tears of gratitude. Tears
Mm.
of gratitude. Sometimes the memories are they're a little bitter, sweet. Everyone, again, thank you for listening. Be sure to hit subscribe if you're on YouTube, like the video, leave a review, and we'll see you next week.